My name is Fahan. This video will teach you how to solve an activity-based costing problem. This is question number 14, taken from 2020, paper 2. If you want to ace your exams and need help with some last-minute preparation, make sure to check the links in the description. I'm offering multiple tutoring sessions throughout the entire month on various topics. With that being said, let's get started. AQA plc uses batch production to manufacture two types of products, X and Y. The business uses activity-based costing when calculating the overhead costs to be assigned to each product type. The following information is available about both products per week. So in this table, we are given all the relevant information that we need for two types of products, X and Y. For example, the first line gives you the production volume in units for each types of products. Our main requirement is to prepare statements which consolidates all the information that we will be solving in our workings and show the revenue, contribution, and profit and loss per week for each type of product X and Y. So on the right hand side of the screen, I've done all the workings. To begin with, we want to find the total variable costs. Now the total variable costs can be found by adding the total of material costs and the labor costs together. Variable costs are those costs that change with the production volume. For example, if you're producing more units, it's logical for your variable costs to also increase. Now, first of all, let's find the total variable costs for X using the formula that we have written here. So the total material costs and labor costs for X are given in the column for X, as you can see. So material costs of £33,750 and labor costs of £42,500. So which are what we are adding here. And then we have the total variable costs for X to be £76,250. We are going to repeat the same thing for Y, where we are going to add the material costs and labor costs together, and you should get total variable costs for Y of £78,000. Next, you want to calculate the revenue or the total sales. Now, if you check the last line of the question, it clearly says that the selling prices for each product are based on an 80% markup on variable costs. This means that if you want to find the sales, you can simply take the variable costs, which we have just calculated, and multiply it with 1 plus markup. So 1 plus markup here refers to 1 plus 80%, which eventually becomes 1.8. So that is a direct calculation that we have done on the right-hand side. So when you want to find the total sales for X, you take the variable costs that you have derived in the earlier steps, £76,250, and then multiply with 1.8, which includes the markup, and you should get the total sales of £137,250. The one thing here that you might be confused, although the selling prices are for each product are based on an 80% markup, it's the same thing whether or not you do it for each product or you do it together for the whole production volume. Then you want to repeat the same steps for Y, where we've took the total variable costs that we have derived earlier and then multiply with the 1 plus markup, which is multiply with 1.8, and you should get £140,400 as the total sales for Y. Next, you want to find the number of batches for each type of product. Now, if you check the first line for the additional information that we're given here, each batch requires machinery to be reset. The fixed production costs for machinery preparation totaled £44,160. Now check the table that's given here as well. The number of units per batch for X and Y are given here, 50 and 75. This means that if the production volume is known for each type of product, how can we find the total number of batches that we need to produce all the units for each type of product? So what we're doing here for X, We take the production volume in units that are given to us, and then we are dividing with the number of units per batch, which is 50, which means that we need 90 batches in total to fulfill our production volume of 4,500 units for X. We are going to repeat the same step for Y, where we take the total production volume for Y, which is 3,600 units, and then divide with the number of units per batch of 75, which gives us the total number of batches to be 48 for Y. Now, why did we calculate the number of batches? So if you remember a while ago, I read the first line of the additional information, which has to do with batch and fixed production costs. So if you want to find the fixed production costs, it's done on a per batch basis, where you take the total fixed production costs that are given here, 44,160 pounds, and then you divide with the total number of batches, which is the total for 90 plus 48, which combines both X and Y together. And on that basis, you understand that there is a fixed production cost of 320 pounds per batch. So 44,160 pounds are the total fixed production costs, and we have 138 batches in total, which is both X and Y added together. And when you divide the total fixed production costs of 44,160 pounds with the total number of batches of 138, you get pound 320 as the fixed production cost per batch. Now what you have to do is allocate these costs based on the number of batches we have for each type of product. The term that we're using specifically is the total machinery preparation, because if you check the first line of the additional information, it says the fixed production costs for machinery preparation. So all this fixed production costs of 44,160 pounds that we have relates to preparation of the machinery. And what's happening is that we have to reset this after every batch. So if you want to find the total machinery prep for X, we take the cost per batch that we have derived earlier, which is 320 pounds, and then multiply it with the number of batches, which are 90, that we have calculated for X. And that should give the total machinery prep costs for X to be 28,800 pounds. We repeat the same step for Y, where we take the fixed production cost per batch of 320 pounds that we have found earlier, and then we multiply with 48, which are the number of batches that we have calculated before, and that should give the total machinery prep costs for Y to be 15,360 pounds. So basically what's happening here is that we know that the total fixed production cost is 44,160 pounds, which relates to machinery prep. And this is distributed 28,800 pounds to X and 15,360 pounds to Y, depending on the number of batches that we have for each type of product, which are 90 for X and 48 for Y. Next, you want to find the quality control procedures. And let's look into the second information that we have given here. So quality control procedures for both products are conducted every 300 units. Okay. Every 300 units, there's going to be some processes carried for quality control. Given that we know the total production volume for X and the total production volume for Y, we can first utilize this number and find out how many times we got to repeat the quality control procedures for X and for Y. So number of times that I'll be repeating the quality control procedures for X is the total production volume of 4,500 units, then divided by the 300 units. That is the interval or the sequence of repeating it. And that gives us 15 times. We do the same thing for Y, where we know the total production volume of 3,600 units, and then divide with 300, which is the sequence of repeating this process. And that means that we have to repeat the quality control processes for Y for 12 times. Once you have figured all this out, then you can look into the cost that we have for quality control. So it also mentions here in the question that the fixed costs for quality control is £68,310. So what we're doing here is finding the quality control every time. So we want to allocate the total quality control to every time we do these processes. So £68,310 is what we have as the fixed cost for quality control, and then we are dividing with 27. Why we are dividing with 27, which is 15 and 12 added together? Because these are the total number of times we will be doing the quality control for both products combined. Once we have done that, we get £2,530, which refers to the quality control costs that should be allocated every single time you repeat this process. Okay? Now, the way you solve activity-based costing questions in exam is more of a logical and intuitive approach. There are no fixed approach to how you should handle this question in the exam, and you can only get better at this with practice. So what we have to do next is find the total quality control costs that we will be allocating to X. Since we have already figured out that £2,530 is the cost we will need every time we do the quality control process, and given that the number of times this is going to be carried out for X is 15, we just multiply both of them together, and then you get total costs for quality control for X being £37,950. We repeat the same steps for Y, where we understand the quality control cost every time is £2,530, and then we multiply it with 12 because that is the number of times we're going to be repeating this for Y. And then you get the total quality control costs for Y to be £30,360. To conclude this, we know that £60,310 is the total costs that we have for quality control, and that is divided between X and Y, where X takes £37,950 and Y takes £30,360, and this is changing based on the number of times we're going to be repeating the quality control steps for X and the number of times we're going to be repeating the quality control steps for Y. Okay, so we have all the information together that we need to prepare our statements. So let's go to the main space for including all the workings. So it's very easy. You create three columns where you have a column separated for X and a column separated for Y. We have already found the total revenue for both X and Y. So total revenue for X is £137,250, which we have found earlier by taking the variable costs and multiplying it with 1.8, which refers to the 1 plus markup of 80%. We repeated the same step for Y. So for X, we have £137,250, and for Y, we have £140,400 as the total revenue or sales. Then we're subtracting the variable costs. So we have kept this in brackets to say that we're subtracting this. So total variable costs were calculated by adding both the material and labor costs together. For X, the total variable cost was £76,250, and for Y, it was £78,000, which we have included here. So when you subtract the total variable cost from the total revenue, you get what we refer to as the contribution margin, or just the contribution, which is £61,000 for X and £62,400 for Y. Then you'll have to subtract all the fixed costs that you have within the business. And the two types of fixed costs we have are the machinery preparation and the quality control procedures. So for the machinery preparation, you had to do a bunch of workings where you had to find the number of batches for each product type. And then once you knew those number of batches, only then you were able to find the fixed production cost per batch and then allocate it accordingly. So for X, the total machinery prep was £28,800, and for Y, it was £15,360. which are what we have included here within the statements. Again, both of these numbers are being subtracted, and the reason they're being subtracted is because they are costs. So they're fixed costs for the business. Moving on to the quality control procedures, what we had to do first was to calculate the number of times we will be repeating the quality control tests for X and Y, which we have found here. And then once we know the number of times we would be repeating those steps, then we took the total quality control and divided it with the total number of times that we will be repeating the steps. And we understand that the total cost every time we repeat is £2,530. Once we have figured that out, then we allocated that to X and Y based on the number of times it was repeated for each product type. And for X, you get a total quality control cost of $37,950. And for Y, the total quality control cost of $30,360. Both of these are fixed costs, and they have been included here under X and Y. Again, you're subtracting them because they're costs. So once you subtract the fixed costs from the contribution, you see that for X, we have a loss, which is $5,750. That's why I've kept it in brackets to reflect that this is a loss. And for Y, we're making a gain of £16,680.